Hello YouTube! With E3 behind us and myself left in a lot of hype and disappointment at the same time, it's once again time for an Elder Scrolls lore video. But before we begin, would anyone be interested in me doing a sort of retrospective on E3, giving my opinion on the different announcements? I would like to do that, but I don't know if you're interested in it, so if you would like that kind of thing, let me know in the comments. It wouldn't be a replacement for a lore video or anything, it would just be a little extra. But with that behind us, let's look into the subject that I've been working on for a while now. Could the Dragonborn Septim Emperors of the past use shouts? So, as we all basically know by this point, in past Tamriel the title of Emperor was given to those who were blessed by Akatosh with the dragon blood, making them Dragonborn, which gave them the ability to wear and use the fabled Amulet of Kings, which could be used in a ritual to light the dragon fires, which in turn would keep Nirn safe from the threat posed by Oblivion. This basically gave the legitimacy to the Emperors. Now, what does this have to do with shouting? Well, that's quite simple, especially if you've played Skyrim. As we know, everyone can learn the power of the Thuum, so the power of the voice, and thus they can learn shouts with hard study and a lot of dedication. The best example of this are the Greybeards, who dedicate their life to the study of the voice. Now, the Dragonborns are a bit of a different case in this. Due to having the dragon blood and apparently the soul of a dragon, they can master shouts a lot quicker, because for them the dragon language in which shouts come is basically intuitive and second nature. They can quickly grasp the meaning behind words of power if they are allowed to share in someone's understanding of the word. The main form in which this comes is when a Dragonborn slays a dragon. At that moment, the Dragonborn absorbs the soul of a dragon and can use the power and the knowledge and the understanding in that soul to sort of steal the dragon's understanding of a word of power, and which results in the Dragonborn being able to use that word of power in a shout. Now, the way that this whole process goes is probably very much simplified for gameplay purposes. I suspect that if you absorb a dragon's soul, you learn all the understanding of all the words that that dragon knows, as that's the way it's basically explained to us. But of course, for gameplay reasons, they can't really do that, as then after about 10 dragons slain, you know all the shouts. So they just say, you know, for every dragon soul, you can unlock one word instead of all the words that are contained in that soul. I personally would not be surprised if that's basically how it goes in the story of Skyrim in the lore, and that they added so many dragons to the game just for gameplay purposes, and that in real lore the Dragonborn only slayed like 20 dragons or something, and that basically gave him a full mastery over the voice. But that's a discussion for another day. But the point is that the Dragonborns can leech off dragons' understanding of a shout in order to learn the shout extremely quickly. Another way in how Dragonborns can learn shouts is by using someone else's knowledge. During the events of Skyrim, we can see that if the Greybeards share their understanding of a shout with the Dragonborn, that the Dragonborn can actually learn a shout with the same speed as when learning it from a Dragon Soul. So the origin of the information doesn't really matter as long as the full understanding of a word is shared. So that can be done using a Dragon Soul, and it can be done using the knowledge of a Greybeard or someone else who is very much versed in the knowledge over a word. So considering that the Septim Emperors were all Dragonborns, they had to be to light the dragon fires, could they shout? Well, that answer is pretty complicated. Simplified history shows us that at least Tiber Septim could use the Thuum and was able to perform shouts. He studied with the Greybeards after being apparently summoned, and he presumably tapped into their knowledge of the voice. And wait, I can already hear some of you typing, so before all you theorizers get angry at me for disregarding the fact that there are theories saying that Tiber Septim couldn't shout and that it was in fact someone else, who we now view as the persona of Tiber Septim. That's why I say simplified history, since the case with Tiber Septim was a little more complicated than the way I present it, but that's not the subject of this video. So we're gonna keep it short and simple for now. What is important is that Tiber Septim, or one of the people theorized to be him, left a lineage of Dragonborn emperors who ruled Tamriel during the Third Era, and as far as we know, they were all able to wear the Amulet of Kings and able to light the dragon fires, as that was the way that they were identified. So, something we know from the first pocket guide to the Empire is that during the early days of Tiber Septim's reign, as Emperor he built a new Imperial College of the Voice, where instead of the Greybeards' use of the voice for worship, it was intended to once again develop the voice for matters of war. This college is said to have been seen in Markarth, but we never see it in Skyrim, so assuming that somewhere in the Third Era this college got abolished for reasons that we don't know, maybe it failed or something. If I had to guess, it would be because learning the voice to non-Dragonborns takes an enormous amount of time and dedication, which might not really fit within Imperial war and art philosophy or something, making this Imperial Voice College basically useless. We don't know who studied there during the days that it existed, but assuming that this college did have some early success and functioned well for at least some years, we may assume that Pelagius Septim I, grandson of Tiber Septim and second emperor of the Empire, studied there before becoming emperor. Whether he had mastered the voice or not, we have no idea really. However, I would like to assume that if he too was a Dragonborn and his grandfather wanted this college to succeed, at least he would have studied there and maybe learned some shouts. We don't know if this college had good teachers who could share their knowledge with the Dragonborn emperors, or if they had to learn it there the hard way through study as the Greybeards do. So essentially this is all one big grey area, but we can at least, well, I think relatively easily assume that the Greybeards themselves wouldn't have taught Pelagius in the ways of the voice, because it was pretty clear that his grandfather wanted to use the shouts for war, and the Greybeards don't really like that kind of use for the voice, as we basically know. But perhaps the most apparent example of the Septim Emperors being able to shout, and a slight hint towards the fate of this Imperial Voice College, would be Potema Septim. She wasn't an emperor, but she was a direct ancestor of Tiber Septim, and lived only 67 years after his uniting of Tamriel, which is a reasonable time frame for that voice college to still exist if it was a serious experiment, considering that the teachers there would have to study for a long time as well. So I think that Potema Septim did study at this voice college, because we know that Potema can shout, because when we fight her remains in Skyrim, she has the possibility to use the Unrelenting Force shout, so Fusorda, meaning that she at least learned one shout during her life, and later it was confirmed that she indeed was Dragonborn. So considering that, I would assume that the Septim Emperors could indeed shout as they were Dragonborn. However, it must have been harder for them to learn shouts, as there were almost no dragons to kill or share their knowledge with during their day, meaning that either they would have to go to the Greybeards, of which we don't have any proof that they ever did, and I don't think the Greybeards would take them in, since they pretty clearly wanted to use the voice for matters of war instead of matters of worship, or they would have to learn it through hard study, as for example the Imperial College of the Voice, if that even existed for a long time, which I sort of doubt. However, I do think that if that College of the Voice existed for a long time, it could have been the place where mortals studying in the Voice could have shared their knowledge with members of the Septim dynasty, making it a pretty successful and interesting concept. We simply don't have any proof of that happening, so I don't quite know. And that said, I already hear criticism on the fact that the Greybeards will probably take the Septim Emperors in, but I don't know either. We simply don't know how the things went down back then, since we don't have any lore on it. But another good example of a Septim Emperor who probably did learn the Thu'um was Uriel V, the one that invaded Akavir. From a recent interview with Todd Howard, we learned that one of the early concepts of Skyrim was that Uriel V would return with an army of dragons from Akavir to retake the throne. This would essentially create a larger conspiracy where the whole disaster in Ionith, where he got killed in Akavir, never even happened. But this scenario never came to pass, and they decided that in canon they just left Uriel V dead in Akavir, deciding on the current storyline with Alduin. However, considering that dragons only bow to ones with stronger voices and a bigger mastery of the Thu'um, it would suggest that Uriel V would need to know at least a couple of shouts in this sort of continuity if Bethesda would have chosen this sort of storyline. So this shows, more importantly, that in Bethesda's mind the Dragonborn Emperors truly were Dragonborn, and thus could more easily learn shouts and could learn them maybe from dragons, because maybe that's how Uriel V in their scenario would have learned it. Or at least that's what I take away from this quote by Todd. So in conclusion, yeah, some of them could shout, at least we have confirmation for Potema, and maybe even all of them, but if that's true, we don't quite know it, because there's simply no mention of it. So that said, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider giving a like and consider sticking around for the next one. Yeah, I want to thank my patrons, who you currently see on screen, who make all my videos every week possible. As you know, every Thursday a video, and next Saturday there is a next lore lecture, which is a live event I basically organize for patrons. So if you would like to join us on that live lore lecture where I just basically talk on call, live about lore to my patrons, consider checking out my Patreon, and then you can still basically apply for coming Saturday. That said, I will see you all in the next video, which will probably be next Thursday. Bye bye.